And then I want to talk about the asset approach to positive youth development, which is a theory, basically, and then the thriving model. And some of you have been through training on the thriving model, some of you haven't, but I want to bring that into our orientation because it is becoming part of our program, part of our background and information. It's not quite 100% there, but should be by spring. We're just waiting on a few things at the national level. So we're going to start talking about experiential teaching and learning. And I should have had Kenny do this because that's what his expertise is. But I'm just going to give you the very basic information about experiential learning. But it is really important in anything that we do in 4-H that we use an experiential approach to that, rather than just a typical lecture and lecture to our youth. And so experiential learning takes place when a person involved in an activity does the activity and then looks back and evaluates it, and they can then determine the usefulness or the importance of that activity. And then they also use that same information that they gained to perform another activity. And that's John Dewey is really he is the when you talk about experiential learning, Dewey is the one that you typically find. He is the leader in that area. So with that, they're going to learn when you do experiential learning, the skills that young people are getting are life skills. They're getting project and content skills. They're getting science process skills. They're getting a lot of applied skills, workforce and leadership skills, and service learning skills. So the 4-H program promotes the experiential model of learning as the primary format for educating youth. Again, we should always use that as our basis. So there's several key steps to take them from beyond simply doing the activity and participating in the activity to making it experiential. So with that, so this is the big picture. A lot of times when we talk about experiential learning, we talk about do, reflect, apply. That's a simple way to describe it. They do the activity, they reflect on the activity, and then they take the skills that they learned in that and apply them to other aspects. There's also a model where it shows the five areas. So they experience the activity, they perform it or they do it, they share. So they share those results, they share their reactions, their observations with the group publicly. Then they process it. So they discuss, I just found a typo. I'm going to have to fix that for next time. They discuss it and they look at the experience and they analyze and they reflect on it. And then the next step is then they take that experience, they take what they've processed and they generalize it. So how can you use this in another aspect of your life? You try to get them to connect it to real world examples and how they can use that in the real world. And then they apply it. So they, take what they've learned and do that in a similar or different situation, and they practice that. And don't worry, I do have slides in here that are going to help you know what kind of questions to ask when it comes to experiential learning. But I want to go through each one of the steps. So we've got the experience. So, the key concept for that is you're really planning for that discovery. You're having them do that activity. So for you as the staff person or our volunteers, the adult leading that activity, you really want to sit on your hands. You want to observe what the youth are doing when they're doing that activity. You're really trying to get them to, you're looking at the bigger picture of it. And so it's really important that you're not jumping in and doing, if a youth is having a hard time, and I'm sorry, I just got to notice that my internet is unstable. Hopefully it doesn't go out on me. I apologize if it does. But if, you really want those youth to experience that and not have the adult jump in and do that activity for them. So the key objectives here is for those youth, it's really about discovery. So you want them to explore, to examine, to construct, and to arrange that activity. When you look at the next slide, the personal and group reflection steps, so this is the reflect. And so many times in our activities, and this is really, I think we see it even more with our volunteers when they're doing club work, they do the activities, but they never get to the reflect or the apply stage. They very, and I can remember doing this, and I can remember, not getting, you don't leave yourself enough time. You think, okay, I have 30 minutes to do this activity. And just for the youth to do that activity is the full 30 minutes, and they never get that chance to process it. And so you really, if you know you have 30 minutes, you plan on 15 minutes for the activity, 10 minutes to process it, and then 5 minutes to work on applying that activity, having a discussion around the apply. It's really important. But when we look at the reflect part, the reflect part, this is really, what happened. So they're sharing and they're processing. So really the key message is what happened. So, and then with the processing, you want them to look at, kind of patterns. You want them to look at what's important about doing that activity. So the role of the leader is to allow that adequate time, to use open-ended questions to really stimulate that thinking and feeling, and encourage pair share. So you might pair the youth up in groups of 2 or 3, even 4, and then they would share there and then come back to the large group and share. Or, if you don't have a super large group, then you could do it just as a large group. And then you get into the application step. So when you look at that generalizing concept, that is really the so what. So what does this mean? But you want them to think about, those real life examples. And then our role there is to guide the youth into making connections between the meaning of that activity, so what they've processed, and how they can use that in the broader world. And then when you look at applying, that is now what? So, it's really having them find ways that they can use this, what they've learned in new situations. So again, this is just another photo of that. So when we look at this, when you look at the sharing part, so what happened? So some questions you could ask them: what did you feel when you were doing that? And just depending on the activity, you get them to think about, were they frustrated? Were they excited when they completed that task? Were they, all of those things, what did they do? Maybe you get them to think about what was something that they did, that they had to do in order to fix the problem or whatever it was. Again, how they feel. What did you notice? A lot of times it's really fun when you get a young person that is like, well, I noticed everybody else was doing it this way, and I do, and I did it this way. I thought, well, I looked at what they did and I tweaked it a little bit and did something a little different. One of the examples that I use a lot of times when I'm doing this activity in person is, if you've ever seen, and I should have grabbed a balloon and a skewer, but if you've ever blown up a balloon, you have the youth, you give them a balloon, and you give them a skewer for, like a bamboo skewer, and you have them blow up the balloon, tie it off, and then you tell them they have to put the skewer through the balloon without popping the balloon. And it's really interesting with both. Now, a lot of people have seen that now, and so a lot of people know the trick to it. But if if you do have a group that hasn't seen that, that is a really good activity, because they do really observe from each other what they're doing. And once one person figures it out, it's pretty quick. If you don't know how that works, you should try it sometime. It's a little magic trick. So, but that's a good one. I've also just handed a small group, a bag of Legos and said, now build a house. And they have to figure out how to build that house out of the Legos that they were given. And so it's always good when you're doing experiential learning to do some kind of activity. I know Kenny has some examples. Like I said, he is really our expert in this area. So it is, if you're doing a training for volunteers on experiential learning and you want an activity, just let one of us know, and we can get you a simple activity that doesn't cost a lot of money. So, and again, another question you can ask him is, what's most difficult? What's the easiest? Does anybody have any other examples of questions that you've used in this part for the sharing? You guys can unmute.
I would just say that, can you hear me?
Yep.
That it doesn't go, it doesn't have to be like linear in what you're doing. So like when you're going through the circle, you can be doing reflection and processing, but then also doing some sharing and then kind of going back. So like if you're asking a question and somebody says something, then you can then go to, how did you feel about that?
Yep.
Right? And then you can still go back to another question that's going to be more of a reflection. So it's not like you're stuck in this one phase. You can kind of be bouncing around to make it work well. You don't want to, like somebody just said, hey, something that is going to make them have felt really good or really bad. You don't want to just like dismiss that and then come back to it later. Like do the circle, go through, and then you come back and process another piece of what happened in the activity.
And I would say definitely between the sharing and the processing, those are really not a step-by-step. You would go between the two. And we just had somebody, what if you did it again, what would you do differently? And that really fits in with this, with the processing. That's, as you can see, that's one of the example questions for the processing. And I think, that's always really important to get youth to, and even adults, to think about, if you could do it again, what would you do differently next time? And, you can see some additional, and these really do, you kind of flow back and forth, because we all know working with youth too, conversations never follow a linear pattern. So, but what are important things that you learned about this? Whatever it was, it could be engineering, it could be, it could be about giving an animal a vaccine. There's lots of, this is applicable to everything we do. What are problems or issues that seem to occur over and over? And why did that happen? What if you had maybe done something else? Done different activities, those types of things. Oops, sorry, I went too fast. Any other processing questions too, or sharing questions?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you guys, it seems to me like this would be a good point in the process to ask them, how does this compare to what your expectations were? A lot of like I do a lot of STEM work with our Boys and Girls Club kids. And so during our warm up, I always ask them to predict what they think is going to happen. My favorite one is when we do like the baking soda in the vinegar and have it fill the balloon. And when I get to this part and ask them, okay, is what happened what you guys expected? That always opens a can of worms, because the kids had no idea it was going to fill the balloon. Does this seem like a good, does that have a place in the experiential learning process, or is that too guided?
Nope, absolutely. I think it's a great question to ask. In fact, I wrote it down on my paper to add, because I think that is getting them to process, here's what you thought it was going to happen, how does, what do you feel like, and I think that's a great question. It's that kind of higher level thinking too. Anyone else want to share an example question or something else that you have? Another type of, in this area? Okay, great. So then you go into the apply area, and oops, I skipped one. Sorry, the generalizing. So this is really getting them, so what? So you did this activity, now what are you going to do with it? So, what did you learn about yourself through this activity? What are some major, and you're probably going to reword these for youth. I mean, could you imagine what are some major themes that relate to other areas in your life? That's probably not going to go over well with younger youth, but you could think about what are some things, you could think about some of those life skills. And it could be where you start off with a non-open-ended question. Did you learn about problem solving? And then you could say, okay, so how did you learn about that? So does that make sense to everybody? Especially as you're working with the younger youth, they probably don't have those, that ability to have that. You may have to start with a closed-ended question and then get them to think about that. So, and again, or what did you learn about this life skill while you were doing this activity? Again, they may not be able to connect it. You may have to take it down just a little bit. And you can see where some of these things may fall into when you're during the processing. I especially think this kind of question is probably going to come up where you're going to have, where you can ask that question as well. And then the next one is the apply. So we're trying to get them to think about how they would then use this skill that they've learned in another area of their life. This part may be more difficult for younger. It can be done, but it may be a little bit more difficult. If we can just get them to think about the so what, then I think that's that's really a good piece. But if we can, if you can get them to think about what would you, if you ran into a similar situation, and it's always good ahead of time to think about some of those similar situations you might run into, so you're not guiding it, but you're kind of guiding it, if that makes sense. So, and how can you use what you learned in a similar situation, and what would you do differently next time? I think that's always, you can ask that more than once. So, any other kind of this area of questions? Anything else people want to share about that?
Sometimes I've just asked, so like, what's another time when you had to do something like this? So maybe it's like we struggled with communication when we're doing this activity together. Like, what's another time in your life that you have to like use communication, just to get them to think about what is another time, or be really prompting, like, hey, do you ever have to work on group projects in school? Like, whatever, just to have them really to think about what it is, because sometimes you have to kind of really push them towards that if they're not there yet.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah. This is probably the hardest to get even high schoolers to think about, but it is a good exercise for them. I always tell people, if we can get through the do and the reflect, that is, because we always forget that reflect piece. If we can get through those two, but really to make it a richer experience, we need the apply. So again, experiential learning takes place when a person involved in an activity can look back, evaluate it, determine what's useful or important to remember, and uses that information to perform another activity. So again, just another quote by John Dewey. So it threads through, really, it could be one skill that they learn through, or many skills that they learn through one activity, or it could be that they learn, these skills through a short series of activities. If you look at most of our 4-H curriculum, it is very much embedded in, experiential learning model is the thread that we use to develop curriculum. Everything has the activity, and then it has reflection questions, and then it almost, maybe if you get old curriculum, it's not in there, but anything new that's been published, it does have that. Now, how can they apply this to other areas of their life? And so it's so critical. But it might be that they're getting that through a series, short series of activities. And I think the important thing to remember is really the focus on learning and leading, to focus on that learning and leading experientially when working with our 4-H youth. Again, that's what makes it fun for the youth too, is not always having everything be, they get lectured to in school, they get, they want to have that hands-on learning activity. And they want to, and it's best if they can complete that themselves without having an adult or somebody jumping in and doing that activity for them. Even when they're working with animals, as long as it's, not a safety issue, it's really good for a young person to learn how to work through a problem. Maybe they have an animal. I can remember growing up, I had a lamb that just flat out refused to be halter broke. I mean, it was just one of those. And, over the years, I've had lots of horses that we had one mare, every time we'd tie her up, didn't matter. I mean, she was 28 years old, and we'd tie her up and she would pull. She would almost pull the fence post out of the ground. And, as long as they're not in a safety issue, having them try to figure out and how to, work through that process is a really good experience for them. I was watching a video the other day of a young lady. She's actually a 4-H'er in Michigan, but I was watching it through this rescue group. But they had a horse that every time she'd come out of they put her out in the pasture during the day. Every time she'd come out of the gate, she would pull. And this young lady decided she was going to work with her and get her over that, so that way she wouldn't do that. And man, it was amazing watching her figure out how to do that. She was, she was safe. And so, but it was really cool to see that. And that's that experience. It was an at-home thing. So I, don't know if her mom did the reflect and the apply, but, those types of things are really good for young people. And also, we are, and I always say this, we are co-learners in a youth-generated, adult-facilitated service for our future. And so we really want those youth to be guiding our guiding that activity. We're just there to facilitate it. We're just there to make sure that, they're staying safe, that they are, and getting them to think about beyond. So I know that was a quick overview of experiential learning. There's tons of stuff out there. This is just, this is really an introduction. Does anybody have any questions about experiential learning? I really, I want you guys to have that, just that basic understanding is really what I look at.
Hey, Carrie, how about, could you talk about how it overlaps with inquiry-based learning? Because I know
that's next.
Oh.
Yep, that's the next. I'm going to talk about inquiry-based learning. I'm going to give an introduction to inquiry-based learning, and then we're going to, as a group, discuss how they, how they're related and how, how they're similar and how they're different, and when you could use each one. Sound like a plan?
Yeah.
All right, because they are very, they're similar, but they're different. So inquiry-based learning is something, when I started in Extension 26 years ago, we did talk about experiential learning. That was part of our learning process. Inquiry-based learning, I would say, was probably in about the last 10 years, 10 to 15 years is really when 4-H really started getting into the STEM world, really with the engineering and that area, we really took on, really embraced inquiry-based learning. So if you look, it's really an instructional method that enhances experiential learning. It allows them for our youth to construct their own learning and using science process skills to explore and gather that evidence. So, I do have a video that I want to share, and I'm trying to figure out, whoa, sorry guys. I know I can do this. I just have to figure out where I do it. Well, let me see if this works. If you guys can hear it. If you can't, Nora, Kenny, because I can see you guys, you're first on my screen. If you can give me a thumbs up if you can hear this.
What is inquiry? Simply put, inquiry is the process of asking questions and doing
Are you hearing it?
Carrie,
Yes.
I can hear it, but I think I'm hearing it more from your computer than through here. Did you select those little, how when you hit share screen?
Oh, yep, that's where it is.
Share and then share again and then select those two little boxes.
Yep, that's what I'm going to do. Thank you. I knew that there was something I had to do and I couldn't. Yep, there we go. Okay, thank you. When you know there's something you have to do, I just forgot. Okay, here we go.
What is inquiry? Simply put, inquiry is the process of asking questions and doing an investigation towards finding some truth or solution. When we use the term inquiry-based learning, we distinguish from traditional schooling, where students sit and receive facts, to an active, student-centered model of learning, where students pursue questions and problems and scenarios to create their own knowledge and meanings, and the teacher takes on the role of facilitator, like a guide on the side. The inquiry-based learning approach has roots in constructivist learning theory, which grew from the work of John Dewey. And inquiry-based learning is an umbrella term under which a number of other terms fall. Problem-based learning, project-based learning, design-based learning, community inquiry, all of this is inquiry-based learning, and all of these approaches begin with a complex question, actively involve students in rigorous investigation towards constructing their own new understandings. And here's the way I like to explain it to students. Inquiry-based learning is when you, the learner, ask a big question about something that really interests you. You're in the driver's seat on a journey towards finding your own answer. You often will create a plan to start, but the journey is open-ended, so you don't know exactly where it will lead. You try different paths, you play, and it's research because you think, imagine, and create in an ongoing process. You organize your ideas and reflect each step of the way, and soon you reach clarity and create something new to share with others. It feels like climbing a big mountain, and when you get to the top, you feel proud and see further than you have before. You may have a facilitator or coach to guide you along the way, and in this process, you develop skills, build confidence, enrich your learning, create meaning, and contribute to the world in a whole new way.
Okay. I am going to stop sharing for just a second because I want to do one thing. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I was kind of going through that last night, looking, and that video to me, yes, it's on a school, it's from a school teacher perspective, but I thought it really gave a good example, and Kenny just shared in the chat box, and I agree completely, because I'm not that creative about how to share experiential learning. He's got some really good ideas on how to do that processing, and so that aren't just pair them up, because they kind of get tired of that after a while. So please, or Kenny, if you have some of those things and you want to share them with me, if I can put them in the box to share with people, that would be fantastic. So, but on inquiry-based learning, as you can see, I think science teachers have maybe embraced a part of inquiry-based learning, but most people, when they see inquiry-based learning, they think it's completely chaos and that there's no learning happening whatsoever. And so it really, it's tough to do in the school system, because they want everything so structured, and they want those kids to be, they don't like chaos. And really, you can use this with any area. You could use it in math, you can use it in science, you can use it in social studies. There's, it can be applied anywhere. It's just most teachers haven't embraced it. So, really looking at some of the benefits of inquiry-based learning. While they're engaged in this type of learning, they're really they direct their learning in a way that it's really similar to how science happens in the real world. They see a problem and they research it and they figure out an answer. They're able to identify their own areas. Youth are finding areas that they're interested in. They're engaging in that hands-on learning, using those science processing skills and getting that information. So then, the results really have an increased ownership. They're really, they feel more ownership in that, and they're enhancing those critical thinking skills. So the facilitator's role in this whole area is really, you're serving as a resource to the youth, to the students, or to the youth. You are, you're just there to, if they have questions. So, in other approaches, the instructors are the ones that are really directing the learning, but in this, you're just there to help guide them through the process. I kind of liked this graphic. It was just one, where they have this question, they're figuring out the methods to come up with the answers, and they might work together in a team. They might, and maybe it's one question and you have different, and you have all the youth are working on different solutions, and you're going to come up with different answers. They're probably all correct too. So again, it seems like chaos, but it's really not. So you're going to establish the parameters, but then let them do that. So, and then the student's role is really to direct their own learning within those parameters. So maybe, there's several, maybe they have, if you're thinking about like engineering, maybe they have if you guys have not seen this, where they have toothpicks or spaghetti noodles and marshmallows, and they have to create what you're doing is, here's your supplies, and I need you, you get these supplies and you have to create a tower, and the largest tower wins. Highest, or the highest tower wins. That's the parameters that you give them. You're not giving them any, that's it. Or maybe, maybe you're not even telling them, you're telling them you can use any of these items. Some of you may have seen the activity where the young person gets, or the team gets a whole bunch of materials. Like they might get tape and index cards and spaghetti noodles and marshmallows and just random things, and and they have to build something with it. You don't tell them they have to use everything in the bag. They just have to use items in the bag. So those are the types of parameters that you're setting. You're not telling them anything else. It's really, you're just, that helps them so that the learning objectives are met, because we have learning objectives. And one of the sessions I'll be doing later is on writing lesson plans and developing our learning objectives. And so, anytime you go to teach or work with youth, you need to have something that they're going to come out with. Can't evaluate anything if you don't know what what you want them to learn. So, that's all you're doing. Throughout the process, the students work in groups and learn from each other. It's really best in inquiry-based learning that they do work in groups, just because it just helps it helps them to process it, and they're in charge of their learning and deciding what they want to learn and embarking in their own journey. So again, you might have to redirect a little bit, but you shouldn't have. You're wanting them to really go through this process. This is an example of one way. There's a whole variety. I was just trying to look. Again, it's very similar to experiential learning. This might not be a linear process, but I just kind of liked, again, and there's lots of different things about this model that I really liked, where they're engaging. So they're engaging in a challenging situation. It's prior knowledge. They're taking their prior knowledge that they had, they're activating it, questions, then they're exploring. So they're investigating that phenomenon. Again, some of their prior knowledge may be challenged. The way when Alex made the comment about the question of, so what was different than your expectations. Again, this is, they're probably going to be challenged because what they expected to happen maybe didn't happen. So they explain. So they're really having that chance to explain again, and then elaborate and evaluate. So the other piece that Sarah just reminded me of too, with the 4-H STEM challenge, I would say probably the last 5 years at least, if not a little bit further back, most of those challenges are based on inquiry-based learning. They go beyond just experiential learning and they go to inquiry-based. The youth are given the materials and they have to figure out the solution. If any of you did the Fitbit activity, that one was total and complete chaos, or maybe just the one that I went to. We did it with about 90 youth at the Boys and Girls Club here in Reno, and it felt like it was just complete chaos. But you know what? They all came back with a product. Each group came back with a product, and they got to check to see if it worked. It was, in the end, it was so cool, but I'm sure anybody walking into that room was just completely overwhelmed by what was happening. And that's what I love about inquiry based, is anybody walking in the middle is not going to understand what's happening is amazing, and those youth are just phenomenal. So again, looking at engaging, this is really engaging those youth in the questionnaire activity. So, they're looking at picture observations, video clips, all these different things. And they are, with that, they're also identifying they're identifying misconceptions that are in there. It really is that student-centered phase where they're going to create the desire to learn more about that topic. So they're doing some, if you know about research or know about, even the science processing, they are doing the initial investigation. They're really looking at, what is a problem that we can do, and let's learn a little bit more if this really is a problem. It's, it's not a time for, as adults, for us to lecture them, define any terms, or provide explanations. It's for them to see if this is truly a problem. And then you go into the exploration piece of it. So this is really giving them the opportunity for a common base of hands-on activities. So they're going to take those, that prior knowledge to inquiry. They're going to generate new ideas. So they're really forming their hypothesis here. They're testing that hypothesis and gathering the data. And then they're looking at that data and interpreting it and then drawing that conclusion. This is, kind of the big piece of it. And then they're going to explain. So this might be a little bit more leader or adult driven. But what you're doing is guiding it based on the student's experiences from the exploration phase. So the students explain their understanding of the concepts, and then as the adult or the youth are explaining their understanding of the concepts, and then as adults, we are maybe going in and correcting a little bit of their misconceptions, because they may have some things that maybe didn't quite, this is where you might give formal definitions, those types of things. So, but you try not to do that as very much. And then you're going to elaborate. So this is where they take that new knowledge, that new understanding of the concepts, and they are applying them. So, a good example is maybe you have, so here's the problem that you have, and maybe you have 4 groups working on this problem, coming up with their solution. You could then have a debate among those. You could have different groups debating about their results, and it would be, you'd have to have it a little bit guided, but it would give them that understanding of how to talk about their new experiences and share those ideas. Just to think about different ways, or they could think about careers. They could, there's a whole variety of things that you could do. And then you have them, evaluate. So things like self-assessments. Maybe you do have a performance-based assessment. This would be where, like with our common measures tools that we have a lot of questions about, specific, like science. We have questions about what did you learn in science, and they talk about the science skills that they learn. It could also be portfolio. This is like in the first Lego League, when they're building the robots, they do have their journals that they have to keep. And that's an example. Or even our portfolio at the end of the 4-H year. That's a good example of an evaluation. So, there's lots of, or they could do a final presentation. There's so many ways that you can have the youth then explain, what they learned. So what I thought was really interesting is it's really important that people understand that inquiry-based learning really does, you can see it helps them to build their social interaction. So, their attention span, and it helps them to develop reasoning skills. It's some of these, some of those life skills that we say that are, important. What I really like about inquiry-based, even over experiential learning, is the fact that it allows the youth to generate their own ideas, and it helps them to learn those skills, and then also critique those skills in group discussions. So it really is, again, it teaches them teamwork or how to interact with others. It also develops that sense of ownership and engagement. The exploration, they learn how to really investigate something. It's a great, way for them. It also has them develop curiosity, resiliency, and optimism. And this is argumentative or argumentation and reasoning. So it gives them a safe environment to be able to engage in a discussion and a debate. And this might be something that you do, to me, we need this right now. And we need to teach our young people how to articulate their opinions without being uncivil, if that makes sense. And so I think it is really important that we get them to think about these things. And so we have them, you know, gives them that opportunity. They can formulate positions, they can make decisions, they can generate questions. But, you know, this might be one of the pieces this might be one of the things, you know, one of the ground rules is, you know, we have to remain civil to each other. And so, but again, it teaches them a life skill that you wouldn't think about. And then also, you know, it gives them a positive attitude to failure. So, you know, we all know that, you know, we're going to fail, especially when you're dealing with science type areas. It's always interesting, like when someone's working on, you know, either a master's or a doctorate degree, and their research doesn't come out the way they want it to, you know, doesn't come out to where, you know, it basically comes out as a failure. And I've seen more theses and dissertations written on a failed experiment, because they, you know, they talk about what they could do differently, etc. And that is a really good skill, you know, even just in life, for us to learn how to deal with failure and how to remain positive about that failure. You know, we always talk about 4-H as and that's one of the things that comes out in some of the research, is 4-H is a very safe environment to fail. And we want to make sure, you know, and this is another example of a way that we could, that, you know, it provides that safe place. So I'm going to share with you, this is about a 7-minute video that was done by National 4-H Council. And these are all, and I'm going to share with you the website. There's 3 different video lessons. And this is why should you include inquiry-based learning in experiential learning activities. And so it was created, again, by National 4-H Council. It's on the website. And I just think, you know, this was another good example of just about inquiry-based learning.
Hands-on learning is a hallmark of 4-H, and most activities in 4-H are designed around the experiential learning cycle. However, hands-on really isn't enough. Research has shown that adding inquiry is an effective strategy to learn both science process and content. Youth model the science process when doing inquiry, and our national goals focus on this approach for learning science.
Oh, why did it stop?
However, hands-on really isn't enough. Research has shown that adding inquiry is an effective strategy to learn both science process and content. Youth model the science process when doing inquiry, and our national goals focus on this approach for learning science.
In these strategies, the learner has more control over how they go about the learning process, and it gives them the opportunity to be more of an independent thinker in solving the particular challenge or problem that's been provided to them. It's an effective way to learn science. We can learn both science content, but through this process, the youth also learn critical thinking skills. It's much more similar to the way science happens in the real world than what we would see in a lecture or in a demonstration. Guided inquiry includes the processes of this independent critical thought. It values the learner's ideas, the learner's questions, allows them to explore those ideas. in order to work toward the outcomes that we're interested in them achieving. We're still trying to achieve a goal, a learning outcome, learning content, learning skills, but the way that the learner arrives at those learning objectives may be different. We talk about getting to a destination, that there's more than one way to arrive at a destination when we're traveling. There's also more than one way to arrive at a learning outcome through guided inquiry.
So often I think we shortchange our youth because we give them so many of the answers and it's more of just a memory lesson for them instead of letting them solve that puzzle. The inquiry aspect caused me to question things I wanted to know that I was curious about. And so it did become my project and my discovery, and it's something that I'll remember much longer, and I think it also motivates youth to search deeper when they leave, so that learning is not something that we always have to spoon feed them, something that they continue throughout their life. It's a lifelong joy of finding that learning experience in everything they do. And it's almost like a wow moment when you have inquiry plus experiential learning. I think that's just the perfect learning scenario.
There are some challenges with guided inquiry. It takes more time. It's what we call messy. It's a little bit loud, a little bit chaotic. But learning occurs in a social environment. Kids learn from one another. Scientists work in groups. They learn from one another. They share ideas.
Young people do well in groups, that they learn more when they're in a group of peers, and that when they have a caring adult or a caring facilitator that's there provoking their learning and making their learning even richer. There's not just the facilitating the inquiry, but then there's the stepping back and saying, what does this mean within this group, and let's reflect about this learning as a group, and let's think about how we're going to apply all of our learning as a group. So it's both very, personal and very collective too at the same time.
There's a misconception that content cannot be learned through inquiry, which is not true. Content can be learned very effectively using inquiry processes. The focus is on the youth learning the concepts, and there may be specific terms that have to be attached to those concepts, which can then be introduced by the facilitator. But the fact that the learners have discovered those concepts on their own means that the learning is much deeper, and then attaching the terms to them has much greater meaning for the learners.
As there are many right paths to learning outcomes, there are also wrong paths, methods that can impede and prevent learning and can turn off your learners. We want to use methods that will turn on our learners.
His assessment of our learning was a notebook, and it really turned me off to science because he was not engaging us in any way. It took me until much later on in life, my involvement with 4-H, to understand that the way we present materials can turn off a learner.
And I realized over the last several years as I was doing scientific exploration with my kids, we often use just canned curriculum. And I always thought that something was really lacking, so I adapted it to include more of an exploration and gave them tons of materials and then stepped out of their way. And for me as a facilitator, initially that was difficult to do, but I allowed them to do that, and we took a 20-minute exercise, an experiential exercise where they could just put it together following my demonstration. And we spent 2 hours building our own sailboats, testing them, floating them, working with one another to make sure that we could adapt and change them to be more successful.
Inquiry and experiential learning are natural ways to learn. And as I was watching Group 2 model experiential learning, I thought, oh, that's us. That's 4-H. That feels comfortable. That's what I think we look like most of the time. And then when I watched everybody interact during the inquiry-based learning, I thought, gosh, we can do more, we can be better, we can have a greater impact on our youth if we find opportunities to practice inquiry. And I think that's a good thing.
As you can see, there's a compelling argument for using inquiry in 4-H for both the learning and the social aspects for our youth. I think they've made a great case of why we should include inquiry in our 4-H program.
Okay, so yeah, I'm watching that video going, oh my gosh, there's so many people that I knew that are now gone. They've retired from extension, but you can see it is, you know, it's a really, to me, it just takes it that next step. And, you know, it's something that I love. Again, this is the website, and I'll get the PowerPoint out to everybody, but there is quite a few trainings on inquiry-based learning. You know, this video's on there. There are 2 other videos. There's quite a few documents on there that talk about inquiry-based learning that we, you know, that I think are really important. And I want to see somebody do the sailboat activity where we just give them a bunch of materials and let them build a sailboat that floats. So I just think that's really cool. So when we think about, and this is where I want to get some interaction from you guys, you know, you can unmute your mics, you can, I was going to see if I could put up, nope, I don't have it on here. I was going to put up the whiteboard, but I don't see it now. It's probably there, I just don't know where it is. Anyway, but I would like to get your guys' thoughts on the differences, where you see the difference between experiential learning and inquiry-based learning, and where you could, you know, where, if anybody has examples of where one might be better than the other, you know, might be a better scenario for that case than the other, etc. So, thoughts? I'm trying to stay quiet. Okay. Student takes, students take more charge in the inquiry-based. That's exactly.
I would argue that experiential education is a teaching philosophy, and that inquiry-based is a methodology that fits within experiential education. So I don't think it's an either or type of thing. I think when you're doing inquiry-based, you are doing experiential education.
Yeah.
That's just where I am.
Yeah. I think part of where I see a difference is maybe experiential is more, it feels like it's more adult-led, like here's the activity, and we basically give them the steps to do the activity, and then we guide the discussion. And I think where inquiry takes it, the next step is it's the youth coming up with that. Is that, but you're still doing, I agree completely, you're still doing.
I would disagree with that. Oh. I mean, I would say that the activity can be set up in any way that you want it to be. So if your activity can be inquiry-based, and I would say that a more effective experiential education process is going to have an inquiry-based activity. So I see that inquiry-based is really the activity part of the experiential learning model, or could be put into that part. Yeah. And I would say that, you know, for me, it is like experiential is like a teaching philosophy. So it's like, it's bigger. And then underneath that is a lot of different methodologies. So like inquiry-based would be a methodology that fits within experiential education. Like service learning fits within experiential education. Project-based learning is within experiential education.
Yeah.
So I don't see like a clear definition between like they're different things necessarily. I think that one is the overarching thing and the others fit underneath it.
And I would definitely agree with that. And if you know, that video really talked about that. It kind of, you know, it just, anybody else have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I wanted to say this is super timely because I'm learning about this literally right now in one of my teaching program courses. But when I just wrote a paper about incorporating experiential learning and inquiry-based learning into my personal teaching philosophy, it came from sort of a base of a constructivist classroom and very student-centered learning. But for me, the main difference lies in experiential learning, hands-on, but there's still a teacher or an adult created outcome, like your goal. They're going to do this, they're going to create this, but there's an outcome. And I see inquiry-based learning more as student directed. We don't have an attachment to an outcome. If you're doing, of course, all my examples are going to be chemistry and science based, but if you're doing a unit on electron activity, you might get a student who gets totally obsessed with fluorescence, and all of a sudden they just take off and do a project on fluorescence that no other kid is doing. So I really see the difference in what is the adult's attachment to the outcome. Are we simply guiding the students to pursue their own interests and giving them the tools as they go along to process and interpret what they're doing? Or do we have, like with our experiential based activities we do with our 4-H curriculum, there's still an end goal that we have for them. That's kind of how I see it. But I get what Kenny's saying too, where inquiry based learning falls under the broad philosophical umbrella of experiential learning. That's just kind of how I take it.
Great. Any other? I'm glad to hear that they're at least talking about experiential learning and inquiry-based learning in teacher education programs, because when I went through mine 30 plus years ago, and I was in an ag ed program where it is, you're learning this. Never once were these concepts discussed. And, to me, that's right in there. So it makes me happy. It makes my heart happy that they're starting to talk about these things.
Yeah, I did my master's in Alaska in elementary ed 2011 and 12. And there was, if I remember correctly, that's kind of when, experiential learning, inquiry-based learning, there was a lot of talk on that, actually.
Fantastic. Yay. We didn't even talk about, what's appropriate, developmentally appropriate for our youth. So, yeah. I had no idea about what was appropriate for the different stages of youth until I started working in 4-H. So, yeah. Yay, it makes me happy. So, one of the things I thought about with this is, if we had a group that was interested, maybe they don't have maybe they want to learn more about inquiry-based learning. I was trying to think, maybe we have a group that does kind of like a lesson study around inquiry-based learning where, they develop a program, that maybe they have a program that they're doing, and we could get together as as small groups and talk about the process of how did you integrate experiential learning and inquiry-based learning into your teaching. Would that be interesting to people?
We're talking about experientially.
I mean, is that something that you guys would be interested, a group would be interested in doing, kind of as a professional development? Okay, I'm getting a few yeses.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, okay, so I think if you don't want to chime up now, let me know, and just send me an email and say, hey, I'd be interested in that. I'll send out a note to letting people know. We could bring it, like Martin Smith, that was on the video from National 4-H Council, just works over at Davis. He, we worked with him a lot on well, he's actually the leading guru, I guess, in extension on lesson study too, but he's also one of the people that's very much into inquiry-based learning, experiential learning, And, you know, I worked with him on the Common Measures grant. And so I know if we needed to, we could even bring, you know, we could have Martin come in via Zoom, or, you know, if we ever get to be able to be in person a little bit more, you know, where it's easier to be in person, then, you know, we could even bring Martin over to talk to people if, you know, if you guys are interested in that. I wish I could get Ed, but Ed Bender that was in that video, but he no longer works for Extension, and I have lost track of Ed. I worked with him a lot so over the years, but that's but I will make a note to pull that together, and I think that, you know, would be a really good thing as we start the new 4-H year. So all right, well, right now I have scheduled, do you guys want, we've been going about an hour, roughly an hour. Do you guys want to take about a 5-10 minute break? Just go get, get a drink, go to the restroom, those, you know, stand up, stretch. I know I need to stand up and stretch. I can do that while I'm doing this, but, or do you guys want to continue on? It's up to you. I had said I would give you guys a break. We've got probably another hour of material. So are you guys good with the 10-minute? Okay. Okay, so I will turn off my sound. I'm gonna continue recording. I don't know if Tracy's still, I didn't see, I think Tracy might still be on. Oops, it just took it away. I'll take this part out when we go to the recording. We'll cut this part out, the break part, to go off of this. But you need to, if you have access to Facebook, you need to go to the National 4-H Facebook page, and they just at noon they posted the kickoff video for the STEM challenge, and there's a celebrity host on there that I think she told us the other day that he is going to be the like a STEM ambassador / spokesperson for 4-H for the next year. I know he's at least working with our with the STEM challenge, and it's pretty cool. So some of you may not think it's cool. I thought it was pretty cool. And there was a group of us kind of going, oh, that's so. All right, I've got 10:19. So we are going to move on to the asset approach to positive youth development. I don't know if many of you are familiar with developmental assets from the Search Institute in Minneapolis. It's been around for a long time. They have the 40 developmental assets. And the way I feel about this is it's really, the asset approach is a theory, kind of like when we talk about the life skills, the even experiential learning, and assets and developmental levels or ages and stages. Those are all really a theory. I think you need to have a good grounding in the understanding of it in order to really understand the Thrive model. And so this is, so I want to talk about the asset approach. And again, it's been around for a number of years. Many of your communities may do you may hear of them doing an asset survey within the schools or even some communities, but it's not something that, we don't necessarily run it through Extension, and they're usually, because it's not cheap to do. I've been through many trainings over my years from the Search Institute, especially when I was in the Midwest, because they're located in Minneapolis. But what is the asset approach? So there are 40 building blocks of development that really what young people need. And when they have these assets, they really are better equipped to thrive and be successful. So what happens when they do? So when you talk about it, it's really the framework that identifies crucial relationships, experiences, opportunities, personal qualities that children and adolescents need to grow up to be healthy, caring, and responsible adults. So, and Sandy said she went to a conference in Minneapolis. Yeah, it's, I really like the asset approach. What they do is they survey 6th to 12th graders when in these surveys, they show that the more assets that a person experiences, so the more assets that a young person has, the more likely they are to make positive choices and avoid high-risk behaviors. On average, a young person experiences about 18 out of the 40 assets. And, that's okay. So we're going to talk about the different assets. So they're broke down into external assets. There's 20 external assets and there are 20 internal assets. So of the external assets, you have support, and then those are broke down into 4 categories. So support, empowerment, expectations, or boundaries and expectations, and constructive use of time. So within the support, you have family support, which is really that the family life provides a high level of love and support. Positive family communication, again, the families, the young person and their parents or guardians, whoever they consider their family, communicate positively, and that the young person then is willing to seek advice and counsel from their parents. The other adult relationships, and this is where 4-H really fits in. You'll hear me say many, many times that, when you talk about assets, a young person needs 3 caring adults outside of their immediate family. That's that asset. And so that's, that 4-H leader, the 4-H staff member, etc. So other caring adult relationships, again, the young person receives support from 3 or more non-parental adults or, immediate family. A caring neighbor, caring neighborhood, or, caring neighborhood, so that they experience caring neighbors. I don't know, hopefully in the small towns, it's not quite so, but I feel like anymore neighbors don't really get to know each other. We live in a great neighborhood where we actually we don't know them a lot, know them very well, but, I can just remember growing up in different, and you always knew places that you could go and couldn't go because you knew that before, an example is there was a park a couple miles from our house. It was a pretty well-known park for doing things that you probably shouldn't be doing as a teenager. And I knew personally that I could never go to that park, because before I even got back home, the neighbor to that park would call my parents. It was just, you knew, and I used to be able to tell you, within a 5-mile radius of where I grew up, who lived in what house. Like, you just knew, and I lived in the country, but I knew exactly who lived in those homes, and they knew who I was. And so you just don't have that. I don't feel like that's as big of a thing anymore. Maybe, like I said, I hope that people feel that way in certain communities, but even as an adult, in the different neighborhoods we've lived in, we've gotten to know a few neighbors, but not like you used to. So that's, that isn't important. As you are an adult in a neighborhood, I think it's good that you get to know who your neighbors are. A caring school climate, that the school provides a caring and encouraging community or environment, and then the parents are involved in the schooling. Parents are actively involved in helping the child succeed in school. The next one is empowerment. So within that, the community values youth. So the young person perceives that adults in the community care about them and that they value our youth. This is when we give them voice in, different things that they're doing. Youth as resources, again, that they're given useful roles in their community. You know, maybe there's a youth coalition. You know, when we have youth, a lot of our communities have youth coalitions that are made up of adults that work with youth programs, but it's really cool when we have youth that sit on those coalitions and they're helping direct what's happening for our young people. Service to others, you know, that they have, that a young person serves in the community 1 or more hours a week. So, you know, that is one of the assets. And then also the safety, so a young person feels safe when they're at home, they're at school, or they're in their neighborhood. And then the other area, expectations and boundaries. So that there are family boundaries, that the family has clear rules and consequences, and that they monitor their young person's whereabouts. Doesn't mean being a helicopter parent, but it means knowing where you're, you know, knowing what the young person knows what those boundaries are, and that, you know where your child, you know, the family knows where their child is. School boundaries, that they provide clear rules and consequences within the school. And the same with, you know, neighborhood, you know, taking, you know, neighbors take responsibility for monitoring young people's behaviors. When we lived in Idaho, you know, Cody had a group of friends, and I think all of us felt very comfortable if one of those young people were doing something that we didn't feel appropriate, whether they, you know, if we saw them doing it or if they were in our house or whatever, we didn't, you know, none of us had a problem with someone else disciplining their children, you know, because we all knew, like we knew what the expectations were. And, you know, I think that is, you know, knowing what those boundaries are. You know, I consider that kind of that neighborhood, small town, pretty much everybody's in the neighborhood, but. And the adult role models, you know, parents or other adults provide, you know, model positive and responsible behavior. Again, you know, this is something we really need to, you know, we need to pay attention to, and that we're modeling that responsible behavior. That there's positive peer influence, you know, that their group of friends model that same behavior, and that there are high expectations on those youth. You know, parents and teachers encourage a young person to do well. Constructive use of time, so that there's creative activities. A young person spends 3 or more hours per week in lessons or practicing, you know, music or theater or some type of art or creative activity to get their brain, you know, using that part of their brain. That the youth programs, young person spends 3 or more hours in sports, clubs, or organizations at school or community organizations. Again, you know, this is another area where 4-H, you know, 4-H can fit into the creative activities and the youth programs. Religious community, you know, a young person spends 1 or more hours per week in activities in a religious institution. Again, you know, these are not ones that are created by Extension or 4-H. This is from the Search Institute. And, you know, and then also time at home. So a young person is out with friends with nothing special to do 2 or fewer nights per week. So, you know, you can see where those are, you know, those external assets are influenced by those that surround the youth. And then we have our internal assets. So there's positive identity, commitment to learning, positive values, and social competencies. So when we talk about those, the commitment to learning, there's achievement motivation. You know, the young person is motivated internally to do well in school. School engagement, that they're actively engaged in their learning and in their school environment. Homework, it says a young person reports spending at least 1 hour of homework every school day. And I know that there's some more there's research coming out that looks at the you know, homework and the importance of homework. And I think part of that would be you know, they're looking at 6th through 12th graders, and they have shown that age group should have some homework. Bonding at school, you know, that they care about their school. And then reading for pleasure. A young person reads for pleasure at least 3 or more hours per week. So they're not reading something for school, they're reading it because they want to read it. And then our positive values. So a young person places high value on helping other people. Equity and social justice. Young person places high value on promoting equity and reducing hunger and poverty. And integrity, you know, they act on their convictions and they stand up for his or her beliefs. Honesty, person tells the truth even when it's not easy. Again, responsibility. They accept and they take personal responsibility for their actions. And then restraint. They believe it's important not to be, a young person believes it's important not to be sexually active or use drugs or alcohol. And then we have social competencies. So, you know, planning and decision making. They know how to plan ahead and make good choices. That interpersonal competence. They have empathy, sensitivity, and friendship skills. Cultural competency. You know, they have knowledge of and are comfortable with people of different cultures, race, or ethnic backgrounds. Resistance skills, that they can resist negative peer pressure and dangerous situations. And then peaceful conflict resolution. They seek to resolve conflicts non-violently. And then you have that positive identity where it's a personal power. So they feel that he or she has control over things that happen to them. So they have that sense of, you know, they have that control. I think that's probably one of the things right now that young people are really struggling with, and adults are struggling with. I think everybody in the world is struggling with not having that sense of control over things that are happening. Feels like, you know, things change regularly, but that they have a high self-esteem, that they report that their life has purpose, you know, and that they have they're optimistic about their personal future. So those are really things that come from within themselves, and, you know, things that they can gain. You know, we can help them to build. These are some of those life skills that we're trying to teach them within 4-H. And these are things that we can help them work towards within our program. So it really is just understanding what these are, you know, and it's hard to, you know, again, we can work, in 4-H, I think it's really important that we work towards helping them build these pieces. But, you know, there's tons of information I'm going to share with you. And actually I can, I'm going to share with you a document. I just have to pull it up really quick. There is a good piece that was built, and I don't know who put this together, but I really like it. Sorry, my Word is just taking a while to open. I really like it for its asset building ideas for youth workers. Okay, maybe I can't share it with you because my Word doesn't want to open. Love it when that does that. But I will, oh, there we go. Okay, now. Let me see if it'll open, since I have Word open. Okay. Sorry, guys. Love it when you, I should have opened it before I started. Because this is a document I really like. Maybe it is open. No. Okay. Well, I'll be sharing it with you in the when I share all of the handout, or share everything with you. I will share that document, but it gives some really good ideas as youth development professionals, what we can do to help build some of these assets in our young people. And it just really does not want to open. we'll see if it does it this time. Does anybody have any questions about developmental assets? Oh, here we go. Finally opened for me. Okay. Here we go. Oops. So are you seeing the asset building ideas for youth workers? Kenny, if we are, just give me, okay, thank you. So you can see when we look at this, when we look at those support assets, so the external assets, smiling at young people. I think another key area for 4-H professionals and for our volunteers that we really need to make an effort in doing is learning the names of our young people, greeting them when you see them. It is, I'm just going to share an example, is I had an AmeriCorps worker that worked for me when I was in Michigan in the county. And one of the programs that he was in charge of was running an after-school program for us. And we had done it the year prior with another AmeriCorps worker, and 30, 40 kids. And then, this is a town of like 7,000 people, and lots of things happening, but to get 30 or 40 kids at this program was just phenomenal. So when her year of service was over, and so we got a new one, and he started this program. And when it first started, there was 30 or 40 kids in it, and I noticed that it was dropping off, that the numbers were dropping off. And so he was going to be gone 1 week, so I said, no problem, I'll go in and teach this lesson for you. So I went in and I taught, I did the after school program that session, and there was like maybe 10 kids there. And by the time I left, I learned everybody's name, and I was calling them by name, and really interacting. And one of the kids in the class, I don't remember, like if it was boy or girl, it seems like it was boy, but anyway, this child came up to me and he goes, "Thank you, I had so much fun today, it was great." And the other person, this is how much I've blocked out that year of his service. I don't even remember his name, but he's like, he never like learns our name. He just says, "Hey, you over there, come here," and doesn't really interact with us. And this was great. And so it was just that small little thing that, really makes a difference, and, helps our young people to develop those assets. And so, and you ask them about themselves and ask them about their interests, and, you can see some of these examples. Knowing the boundaries for your organization that everybody agrees upon. So if you're going in to do, if you're doing an after school program that you're doing yourself, you have the group, the first day create those group boundaries or those group rules, enforcing those group, enforcing those rules. Instead of being harsh on a young person, try to redirect them to a better way, a better activity, or a better way of acting. Again, think of it as a teachable moment. I think we all have those where, we want that. Talk and act in ways that you want the young person to follow. We have to remember that we're the role model, and that, people are always watching us. And this is something that's even hard, when we're in our communities. We, even if we're not on the job, we still have to remember that those young people know who we are, especially in those small communities. They know who we are. They see us at the grocery store. They see us at the, at the restaurants. They see us everywhere. And we have to be, we have to remember that, we can't be yelling and swearing and, doing things that, we don't want our young people to do. And, again, looking at, constructive use of time assets, ask them what activities they're involved in, ask them what, they enjoy most. I'm not going to go over all of these, but I just wanted, again, these are, I guess, You know, I wanted to, I'll be sharing this with you, but I think that there are some really good pieces, you know, some things that we can remember. And, you know, there's times I have to go back to this and remind myself, you know, especially since I don't work with young people every day now, it really is important. So I'll share that, as well as many other, you know, several other resources that we have. So do you guys have any questions about developmental assets? Yeah, be genuine. Yes, I like that. That's definitely important when we're working with our young people. Okay, did I hear somebody unmute? Oh, okay.
Well, you okay. So I unmuted myself, but changed my mind. But I was gonna say one of the goofy things that works for me with the middle school kids, especially, is like learning their little nicknames for each other. And all of the boys nowadays have rap names. And it was actually suggested to me by one of my course instructors to learn and use their rap names. Like I thought, oh, it'll be inappropriate, but when, I mean, they're cute little names, and it makes like you become like into their internal circle when you know that that's important to them. So, I mean, with pop culture, like this stuff will change, but when I said be genuine, I was thinking the kids, they sense blood in the water when they know you're like forcing it. And I was just gonna say, you know, just to be able to connect with them on a level that's important to them, like what they call each other, makes so much of a difference in when they stop to listen to you because they know you're legitimately interested. So it's kind of a goofy little thing, but I just try to get into their inner circle and listen to what they're calling each other and what their little nicknames are.
Yep, I think that's good. It's, yeah, getting to know them and making them feel like they're important to you is, you know, part of that, part of those assets. I mean, I still have kids, you know, well, they're not kids, they're 40 something years old now, with, you know, almost getting ready to have grandchildren, not quite, but it feels like it some days. But I have, you know, 4-Hers that I worked with that, you know, I still keep in touch with. And that was, you know, when I first started my career. And so it's really kind of, you know, you get, not everybody, you're not going to connect with everybody, but I think it's good if you can, especially if you're doing like working in a Boys and Girls Club, doing an after school program, if you can get to know them, find out what they like, what they don't. Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to switch gears and talk about the 4-H thriving model. So there, you know, this is a model that's been around for a few years. They've been working on it. There's a couple of committees. There's 3 committees nationally that have been formed. There's one that's working on professional development for both staff and volunteers, so that we can introduce and really be able to dive into what this means for 4-H and how this works. There's also a committee working on the implementation, because you're going to see through this, part of it is, you know, we have to figure out how we're going to implement this in our program. And I can't remember what the third one is doing now. Sorry, it just completely left my mind. But essentially, what this is there was Mary Arnold is a researcher from Oregon, now is working at National 4-H Council for a couple of years, trying to get this put together, as well as some other pieces. But the 4-H thriving model really is a way for us to predict the impact of 4-H on positive youth development. And you'll understand that. So I don't talk about this in the beginning because I feel like you need to have that, you know, at least a baseline data of some of the theories. Some, you know, there was a lot of discussion of this is going to take away essential elements and the life skills and all of those pieces. And it isn't. It is meant, you know, we have to have those pieces that we have to use those in our programming in order to get this to happen. And so, you know, that's why, you know, I've done the you have to understand how young people think and, what's developmentally appropriate. We have to have an understanding of what are life skills, what are, how are we going to reach youth? The developmental assets, again, I think it's important that we understand, the assets. And that young people need to have those assets in order to be successful. And how can we be contributors to that? We need to have that understanding of what is experiential learning, and because it all fits into this thriving model. So we look at this, and this is the first rendition of the model. So I'm gonna, you can see it hasn't changed a lot, but it has changed some. So in this first model, she really looked at youth interest, that's kind of that 4-H project, and then looked at program quality, our PYD principles, looked at program integrity and duration and developmental relationships, and then all the way down to the developmental outcomes. In the final, or in this draft, this is the revised model, and I think, yeah, this is essentially the final draft. So we have developmental context. So that what she originally called the youth interest, or the 4-H project, is now called Youth Spark. So you're going to hear, getting that, you're trying to find that spark of a young person. We're going to talk about these things, but that is really, that's our 4-H project. That's what gets our young people into the program. That's really the core of what we do. It's the center of the circle, as you can see. It gets them there, but what we do from there is really what grows that young person. So then, looking at our program quality principles, we really want to, this is the final model. We want to look at what is it, we have to have a standard set of program quality principles. And that's some things, that are going to be coming out with once this is adopted on the national level. We will have, but there are evaluation tools that are available to look at program quality. So, and we've started integrating some of those evaluation tools into the statewide assessment. This year, we replaced several questions with some of these questions from the 4-H Thrive model evaluation, looking at program quality, etc. And then also looking at that developmental assets. This is all part of the developmental context. So you have to have these things in order to move, to have that move forward. So essentially what this does is it predicts that a youth who participates in 4-H programs that provide a high quality program, that are, high quality developmental context, they're going to thrive, and that these thriving youth then achieve these key developmental outcomes. So let's break this down. So here's the 4-H as a developmental context. Again, we've got that, the spark, the program quality, and then the developmental relationships. So when you look at Spark, that's really providing a place for youth to explore their interests and their passions. So their Spark. If we bring a young person in, we see a lot of young people nowadays coming in for shooting sports. That's what they come into the program for, but then they see what else is available, and we get them involved in, so they're there for shooting sports. They come to the state shooting sports match, and they grow because they get that new experience, and and they're getting more and more experiences. So the program quality, we're offering programs that follow youth program quality principles that focus on youth belonging. So that brings that essential element, those essential elements of belonging, mastery, independence, and generosity into it. We need to make sure that they have that sense of belonging. And again, they're following experiential learning, that they have a high quality program. and then our developmental relationships are those youth adult relationships, that we're emphasizing those relationships with adults who are caring, that they challenge growth, and that they share power with the youth. And I think this is the piece that we will really focus in with volunteers, getting them to understand the importance of, it's not just all about the project, but you need to have these other pieces in there. And sometimes I think especially our volunteers do tend to lose focus of that piece. And so I think getting them to understand this, we will then move, through the trajectory. So, I really think, and I don't necessarily, I do see it with some of our volunteers in Nevada too, but I have, speaking of one of my former 4-Hers, one of my 4-Hers that I had when I was in the county in Michigan, she invited me to a Facebook page or Facebook group. Michigan is not allowing face-to-face face-to-face interaction yet with 4-H. It's because Michigan State is not allowing it. They're not allowing anything. And right now it's been suspended indefinitely. They're talking about, possibly fall of 2021. And so there's a group of volunteers and parents that have gotten together and created this Facebook page about they want face-to-face activities. I haven't, I lurk on it, but I was watching a lot of these volunteers talk about it was all about the fair, and we needed the fair. They needed to be able to go to the fair because they need to be able to sell their animal. And to me, that means that they have lost the point. And many other volunteers did kind of jump on him and say, wait, you've lost the point of 4-H. Like, it's not about the fair, it's not about selling the animal, it's, and so that's where I think we need to stress this stuff with our volunteers. So looking at Youth Spark. So it's really that spark, we all know what that is. It's that passion for, that interest or skill that really gets it. It creates, and when a youth it's different than a leisure activity. So with a spark, it creates action, that they're not only can contribute to the benefit of the young person, but it also contributes to society as a large. When you get a young person that is passionate about shooting sports, it's probably going to then get them involved in the outdoor, the outdoor education, and they're going to be, talking about, they're going to be advocating for firearm safety, and they're going to be advocating for the outdoors and, keep our area clean, etc. So that's where it does bloom. When you get, and it provides that intrinsic fuel for the young person's knowledge and skill, their growth in knowledge and skill. Again, this is where inquiry-based learning, it's that intrinsic, I want to learn more about this. And so you can use inquiry-based learning, even in shooting sports, you can use inquiry-based learning to have them learn about something. And it also enhances their network, as they're going to find others with similar sparks, and they're going, and especially adults who are then going to help facilitate them in learning opportunities and engagement. This is where you could, as our program, as a young person kind of moves through the program, we should be getting more into the career preparedness and workforce readiness. Maybe we can, work with shooting sports. We can work with Endow and, see if there's an opportunity for our young people to volunteer with them. One of the things, my own son, his experience once he turned 16, so I don't have too much longer, but his 4-H volunteer's son is a conservation officer for Endow, and he already has met Ian and talks to Ian, but when he turns 16, he can then go on ride-alongs with Ian and see what he does, because that's something that my son is very interested in doing, as a career. And so being able, that's, but that wouldn't have happened without that spark. So again, seeing that, that's really important, and looking at how we can facilitate that as a young person grows through our program too. And then our program quality standards. These are the areas of the program quality. There's 8 critical aspects. It's really, we all know this. It shows when youth programs are done well, they make that positive difference. And so the 8 critical elements, that they feel physically and psychologically safe in our program. Many of you will, and I say this all the time, and I have argued with the university many times about, my job is to provide a both physically and emotionally safe environment for all young people in our program. And, that is really critical, that they feel safe when they come to 4-H, that there's appropriate structure, that, even in, we talked about inquiry-based learning kind of being chaotic, but it's still a structured chaos. If, hopefully you guys are all okay with structured chaos, because that's when best learning happens. We have supportive relationships, both with adults and with their peers. That's really critical. You cannot, as a 4-H volunteer or as a staff member, you cannot allow, young people to be, even though they may be kidding around, but if they're making fun of each other, you just say, we don't allow that in 4-H. You may be able to do it at home or on your own time, but we don't allow it here. Opportunities to belong, again, that is the most critical piece, is that they feel like they belong to the program. Part of our problem this last year has been, the youth don't feel like they belong to something because we haven't been able to meet face to face, but getting everybody to understand, we might not be able to meet face to face, but having them, meet virtually, they're at least still, there's still that sense, and not making it, trying to make them feel like an important part of the program. Positive social norms, again, setting those boundaries of what's appropriate and what's not. Support for efficacy and mattering, that they feel like they matter to the program. Opportunities for skill building, both content skill building and life skills skill building. An integration of family, school, and community. It's, if we can do that, again, that's, and they're supposed to be doing training on all of these pieces, but I think it's important that we look at that. And then we have the developmental relationships. Again, we need to have that quality relationship that doesn't, now I have seen at times where you think that you are, I've seen the boundary be close to being crossed if between a staff member, especially with our younger staff. There, I see that, maybe, and, I even now looking back, probably did cross that boundary, not in a bad way, but more friends than adult child relationship, if that, hopefully that makes sense to people, but you become more friends with them, and you really have to be careful with that, and it is a, but you need to make that positive relationship. They're developmental too, because they grow and change. It does, obviously now with those, the young people, it has, I can be friends once they're out of the program, you can become friends, but until then you have to really watch that. But, express care for them. Let them know that let them know that they can come to you, that you're a trusted adult in their life, and that they can come to you if they have a problem. Now, you do have to be careful too, you know, that they know that you are a mandatory reporter as well. So you do have to, you know, you let them know that up front, but, and that you challenge them, you know, don't make things super easy on them. Sometimes I feel like, and that was, I was watching a news report this morning, and it was really interesting, or no, I'm sorry, it wasn't the news report. I was participating in a mental health, I was watching a mental health webinar that APLU was putting on this morning. And one of the things that they were talking about, especially the young people now, this generation, are really struggling with mental health. And they said they don't know if it's, you know, stemming from, you know, they're just like, they tend to have everything, you know, given to them. Parents go in, they're not able to figure out their own solutions, etc. Parents kind of come in and wipe away all those barriers for them. And so, you know, this really, by challenging them and not solving all their problems for them, really helps them to grow as people. And then providing support, sharing power, making sure that young people, and this is something that we, you know, I need to work on in the state, is having young people serve on some of these groups so that we know that they are, you know, that they have that say in the program, and expanding possibilities, you know, showing them what else is out there. Any questions on that piece? I know it's, again, you know, I just want to introduce this to you more than anything. Okay, so then it goes into this trajectory, this thriving trajectory. And this is, you know, these are the pieces, and we're going to talk about these, but, you know, these are the pieces that as they move through this, they do tend to have, sorry, I'm just going back to my notes, you know, essentially this is, you know, the interaction between the youth and the social context is what helps them to move into these developmental outcomes. So when you look at thriving youth have intrinsic desire and willingness to try new challenges. They also, these are youth that are thriving. They cultivate a growth mindset that emphasizes effort in learning over innate ability. So they're always willing to grow. When we, you know, in sports, we talk about coachable youth, you know, coachable kids. We want coachable kids, not the best athletes, because they have that growth mindset. They're willing to grow and learn more. They don't know everything. They have a hopeful future. You know, they feel like they have a purpose in life and that they have a hopeful future, that they're connected to something greater than themselves that provides meaning and purpose in life, that helps to shape their everyday life. So that's, you know, if they're involved in activities, 4-H is an example. You know, they are involved in something greater than just themselves. They have that, you know, that area. They demonstrate pro-social values in respect, honesty. You know, they're demonstrating that they understand what respect means, what honesty means, what responsibility means, what empathy means, and what helping. And I think this is something for us as 4-H, you know, we can help work on, you know, teaching them, you know, empathy and how to think about others, not just themselves. And I think, you know, I think we do that pretty well, and then being able to express and manage their emotions appropriately, and manage and set goals with perseverance towards goal achievement. You know, this is part of what, when we talk about, you know, we always record keeping with our youth. We have them set, you know, even if your county doesn't do record books, you can have them sit down and, you know, in the club, what are 2 goals that you want to achieve this year? And then at the end, you talk about those goals. So I think that, you know, and did they achieve those goals, and have them think about that. So when you look at this, again, being open to challenge and discovery. So, challenge our 4-H members in supportive and helpful ways where they can grow. You encourage them to take positive risks, like speaking in front of others. If your county doesn't currently do demonstrations, I think it's really important, even, at the club level, that you do demonstrations about that project. That helps them to develop that confidence and that growth mindset. They also, they believe that they can be better they can be better at things if they work hard and they put in the effort. So, and again, growth mindset is an important quality for thriving. And then having that hopeful purpose, really understanding that, a sense of purpose is more about being goal directed, and by having that sense of purpose, you tend to have increased life satisfaction. You're better, your mental health is better, your emotional well-being is better, and you have a greater positive effect. It is, if you haven't had a chance, and I'm going to be trying to post these in the next week during National 4-H Week. I'm going to post some of they've announced the 4-H Youth in Action finalists. I think there's 2 in each category. And seeing what they have accomplished through their, they've been challenged to go beyond just, and it's really interesting. You can see that they have that sense of, that sense of what's beyond them, and that sense of purpose. And just looking at those stories is really inspirational. And so I think it's, that's a really key thing, is having them think about that. And it's important for them that they can also connect to their community. So that pro-social orientation. So really thinking about caring about others and taking actions that reflect on that caring. So being able to go out and make a difference, really internalizing those positive attitudes and actions so that they become part of their own core values. That it's really important to give back. If, when you look at the tough study, the longitudinal study that they did looking at what makes 4-H different than other youth programs, the big thing that they came out with was our contribution to community. That was the #1 key factor that made us different, because we emphasize that service to community so much that it really kind of becomes ingrained. Even as a professional, there's a group of us that always laugh because, we're the first ones to volunteer for, different things like, I was at a conference one time, and there was a group of us talking, and one of them said, yeah, somehow, I don't know how it happened, but I ended up on our homeowners association board. And somebody goes, well, did you volunteer to run, to be on that? And she goes, yes. And we all just kind of laughed. And it's like, and she goes, it's because nobody else would. And it's, it even ingrains in us, that sense of we need to help and we need to be of service in our community, and you'll find those that volunteer as adults in their community are probably some of the busiest people, but because it's been ingrained in them for so long, that's, they do it. So, and then transcendent awareness. And I will tell you, I really hate that word. To me, and we've done this training, we've introduced this model with our shooting sports volunteers. And when I did it in person and I would talk about transcendent awareness, their eyes just glazed over, and I kind of lost them at that point, because it is such an academic word. It's good to talk about, when you talk about this, it's important to help our young people understand that, the world is bigger than themselves. That's the key principle behind that topic. they really need to, you know, to look at the world. They need to build a bigger connection, you know, than just themselves. And that's really, you know, the key. They need to be committed to their own personal beliefs, their morals, their values. You know, that is what helps guide them every day through their thoughts and actions. Even if you don't agree with those, I think it's important that they feel that those are important. And then, you know, positive emotionality. They are able to express their emotions in a positive way. You know, that they can talk through their emotions, that they can, you know, they're not hiding their feelings. If you looked at the study that was released back in, June, I think, from National 4-H Council on the mental health status of young people, that was probably the biggest thing that they felt like they were being required to suppress, or they felt like they were suppressing their emotions, and that was what was expected of them during the pandemic. And so we have to be able to, it's really important that young people understand that they need to talk about those emotions, and that they need to be able to express those in you know, hopefully in a positive way. And, you know, that they have that ability to see the future and to set their own goals and know how to work towards those goals. You also hear this known as, the new buzzword is grit. And so really being able, you know, that grit is them being able to set the goals and work through those goals and achieve those goals. And that, you know, they're showing that grit is a bigger predictor of success than just intelligence or ability. Again, coachable kids, or kids that are willing to work hard, you know, than natural athletes is really, and I've been looking, I saw a study that a lot of the professional athletes are not necessarily the best athletes. So a lot of them are ones that have been willing to work hard and, you know, be better. If you read the story of Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team and came back to be, you know, one of the world's best, you know, athletes in general. So, you know, again, that's that grit, that that piece is really important. So then, you know, youth engagement, and these pieces, that thriving trajectory, those, you know, those pieces I just talked about are really that youth engagement piece. It moderates the effect of that, you know, they haven't come up. I know we talk about the number 6 hours, you know, 6 hours of instruction is what we need to use. I will tell you that number has not been researched. It has not been, like, there's no research that shows that's the magic number. It was a number that somebody made up back in the probably 80s. I'm trying to think of when, I think Alan Smith retired, like maybe 2 years after I started working in extension back in the early 90s. So it was before that, because Alan Smith is one that kind of made that number up. He worked at USDA in National 4-H headquarters, but he, you know, there is some research being done with this thriving model area to try to see if we can come up with, what they're finding is there's no magic number, but the more a youth is, you know, the longer a youth is engaged in our program, you know, the more impact that 4-H has. And we know that. That's one of the reasons why we talk about, you know, we get the youth involved in, you know, we might have, you know, do an after school program where they're involved, you know, for a while, or we might do a short-term program. But what we need to do is then, you know, we need to get them the information about how they can be involved. And we need to, you know, maybe the club model isn't necessarily, you know, we need to think about that and how that looks. You know, a lot of our programs, we've been trying to develop a more long-term, like civic engagement. There is a plan that takes it from you know, here's the first year that a young person is involved in civic engagement, all the way through, you know, it's like a 7-year plan. There's something new every year that they participate. It's not saying that they, you know, they have to like follow that, but there's a growth plan for them. And that is my goal, is to have that growth plan in, you know, in all of our areas. You know, even when you think about camp, is there a growth plan? You know, if they come to camp multiple years, they do the same thing every year, or do we want to develop a growth plan, you know, where maybe, you know, there's activities for young people where they get more, you know, they can step up into leadership roles, but there's, you know, there's always a growth. So, and then we look at these, again, this youth engagement. So it's that duration, that intensity, and that breadth of engagement. You know, when they can participate in 4-H actively and regularly, and they can, you know, participate in those extended learning opportunities. I know that, you know, right now we've been trying to build these. It's, you know, hopefully things will start building. But, you know, we're even looking at trying to do some international stuff just to, you know, for that growth. And then, you know, it comes to these developmental outcomes. So I'm keeping an eye on time. So we have, you know, as youth are, you know, they have that developmental context, then they move through this thriving trajectory, more involved, you know, the more involved they are in the program, we know, you know, the longer and the more involved, then they do gain more of these skills, and we can show that there is developmental outcomes. So when you hear us talk about, you know, being involved in 4-H is going to help with young person's academic success, there is research that does show that through this thriving model. You know, also their motivation, etc., because they're building these skills, and that's going to in turn. So you look at youth who thrive because of participating in 4-H do have a higher level of academic achievement and motivation. That's been shown in multiple studies. There was several studies done, especially in the Western region, on the impact of 4-H. It was done in Idaho, Montana, Colorado. Seems like there's an Arizona and another state, I don't remember. But back in, gosh, it would have been probably 2005 or 2006, but they did show that young people, and the Tufts study as well, did show that young people in 4-H do have a higher academic success. They have a higher graduation rate, they have a higher graduation rate from college, etc. They do have a higher social confidence. They do have higher personal standards, contribution to others, connection to others, and personal responsibility. Again, these have all been proven through multiple studies. And then this slide, for those of you that like the research piece of it, you know, this really is that research piece. So there is a significant, you know, they have shown, the only one that they didn't show a significant relationship with was, you know, developmental contexts and developmental outcomes. But they do have, but when you go through this developmental context to that thriving trajectory to the developmental outcomes, there is a significant relationship. There is a really good article, I believe it's in the Journal of Extension or the Journal of Human Science, I can't remember now, Human Science and Extension, that Mary wrote. I will try to find that article and include it in the resources if you're interested in the research behind all of this. Not everybody is. And then what it does is, so if you go back and look at this model, you can see that we get these developmental outcomes, and then we're finding these are the long-term outcomes of youth that are involved in 4-H. So again, what's really kind of cool, they have, you know, they broke them down into the head, heart, hands, and health. So, you know, you can see these are those. And I actually have a good friend that I did my doctoral work with. He and I were in the same program together. He was also an extension educator in North Dakota. He did his dissertation on youth that were involved in 4-H and FFA as young people, that were leaders in 4-H and FFA. So maybe they were a county ambassador, a state ambassador, county FFA, a chapter officer or a state officer in FFA, how involved they were in their community civic engagement as adults. And he found that many of them actually had gone into public service, whether it be a elected official. Many of them were county commissioners, etc. So that was a really interesting, and again, kind of falls right in here with these results. And then this one we don't have to worry about today, but it really, when we talk about evaluation, we have the common measures and then the thriving model, and there are 2 sets of evaluations for that. They've done a really good job trying to figure out, and this is probably more for myself, for the extension educators, those that are working on evaluation. If you want to do an evaluation of a program, we can work with you to figure out what's the best tool to use. It would be great, but we can, there are those tools. When we look at developmental context, so when we're looking at program quality, those types of pieces, we could use the 4-H experience, which we do ask in our statewide evaluation. That we ask those 4-H experience questions, but there's also a tool from the thriving model that's available. When we talk about the process of youth development, that's really where we should use the thriving indicator instrument. But then when we want to find out the content outcomes, do we want to find out if they learn more about science, or if they learn more about healthy living or citizenship, the program outcomes, then we would use those common measures tools. And then again, the developmental impacts of the program. What is the impact of our youth participants, from participating? We can use the common measures instrumental tool, common measures universal tool, or the thriving model developmental impact tool. Now again, in this year's statewide assessment, that is, we did add in some of those developmental impact questions because we felt like they would achieve the goal better than what was originally there. So that is a quick overview of the Thrive model, and it looks like I lost a couple people, but it doesn't surprise me because that's, it was a long day and I realize that, but thank you for those. Do you guys have any questions about the Thrive? Again, you're gonna be hearing more and more about the Thrive model and how it fits in, with what we're doing in the coming year. I'm just, it's just waiting for those committees, and my understanding is they're right there getting them out. So. Any questions about anything we talked about today? No, it's a lot. I promise I won't do that again. I just felt like it was going to put us way too far behind if we didn't get both of those done in one day, and I looked through my schedule and couldn't find any other times to do 2 different ones. So. All right. Well, if you guys don't have any questions, thank you. I got you done 5 minutes early. Not too bad. And I will probably within a couple of weeks, it's probably going to be a couple of weeks, I will send out an email about about inquiry-based learning and experiential learning, and kind of doing that lesson study type opportunity for people, if and see who wants to do that, participate in that. I think it might be kind of cool. So If not, have a great weekend, everybody. And go check out that National 4-H Council website or the Facebook video. It's kind of cool. I'm kind of excited. And our young kids are gonna probably love it more than anything. And look for just so you guys know too, if you want national or the STEM challenge kits and you haven't contacted Kenny, please contact him, because I was able to order many kits, like a lot of kits. Well, not a lot, but enough for all of our counties to get them. And so we have them available to do. We won't, you don't have to do them next week or, but we'd like them to, we'd like you to try to do that experiment at some point in October. So thank you and have a great rest of the week.